The influencers to the Native American culture petitioned Congress through the Bureau of Indian Affairs to outlaw the entire American Native culture. This law actually passed the House of Representatives. And then the Senate used my great-grandfather's words in front of Congress, and the Senate killed the bill. My grandfather then went to the Native American culture, or medicine people, in Oklahoma. And he said, this is not going to stop these people. They're going to outlaw and stifle your entire culture. Now, mind you, this is 1918. And within the past 100 years of this, there are three things that have been perpetrated upon the American Native culture. One was an outward, unabashed attempt to eradicate the entire American Native culture by killing them. As I said to you, I am a descendant of Osceola. Well, the direct descendant of Osceola, he had a few wives, two. And one of them happened to be an escaped slave. And his mother, after he died in prison on the East Coast, his family, his daughters, 2 daughters, and his wives and his mother were placed on a ship that sailed around Florida, came up to the Mississippi River, and placed on the Trail of Tears. They traveled and they escaped off the Trail of Tears. But then something happened right after that, with the graciousness of many of the religious organizations, knowing that if you were on the reservations, you were going to be murdered and poisoned or given rancid beef. And the Native American culture now, because of the dietary things that were given to them and forced upon them, diabetes is just rampant. So we're still suffering from this mistreatment. Again, I want to say, I'm not saying this thing from any type of position of anger at all. And you'll understand why in a few moments. But because of this atrocities that were being perpetrated on the Indian reservations, certain religious groups band together and developed the Indian school program, where they at least took them away from the atrocities of the tribes of what's going on, but then put them into these schools, and it's called cultural genocide, where if you spoke your own language or honored your heritage, man, didn't go good for them. And some of my elders and friends and companions, they can still, tears come to their eyes of what had happened to them. In 1890, something happened. Something happened. And what happened, how many people are aware of an incident called Wounded Knee Massacre? Well, in 1890, December the 30th, there was about 300 or 400 Native American people that were gathered because they had escaped off of the Indian reservations and were told, if you come back on the Indian reservations, we won't kill you. But you have to come back to the reservation so you can be protected. Well, that was kind of not a good thing, because what happened is now they had them all together into one place in Wounded Knee, and they pulled out their Hotchkiss machine guns and murdered grandparents, babies, women, and children. Sometimes when I hear atrocities, I think about how if that was my grandparents, How if that was my mother? And I got to tell you, it still hurts. But again, I hope you're not feeling or seeing any hostility or anger. I just acknowledge what happened. But this incident had a blessing to it. And the blessing was this. How many people remember or are aware of a circus called Buffalo Bill Cody's Circus? Yeah. Well, he had 2 acts that were the most popular of all of everything that he was doing, that traveled in Europe, back and forth, up and down the East Coast, Washington, D.C. Those 2 acts, number 1 was Annie Oakley. That was really a draw. But right next to that was Sitting Bull. Popular. They were enthralled with the authenticity in which Sitting Bull carried himself. Not many people know Sitting Bull was a medicine man. Well, anyway, about a week and a half before Wounded Knee Massacre, the Bureau of Indian Affairs put their Indian police and murdered Sitting Bull. That information got back to the East Coast. These people knew, whoa, killing women and children? And Sitting Bull? We know Sitting Bull. He's a neat guy. So that was the last government-sanctioned murdering of Native American people. So as time went on, the Indians that were carrying the culture, the Native American culture, started to do their ceremonies, but then they were being arrested and thrown in prison, which isn't as bad as killing them. And so they said, guys, if we do our pipe ceremonies or our sweat lodges or our marriage ceremonies, gosh, we'll get thrown in prison if we do it on the Indian reservations. So they said, let's go off the Indian reservations because they're not going to kill us now. So they started doing their ceremonies off of Indian reservations. Well, when they did that, the influences upon the Bureau of Indian Affairs, primarily certain religious organizations, which I'm not going to mention, land speculators, said, you have got to go stop this culture from prospering. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs says, I can't do anything about it. And they say, why not? Because they're off of our jurisdiction. They're not on federally recognized Indian tribal governments. So they all got themselves together and went back to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and said, Bureau of Indian Affairs, formulate a law to outlaw the entire American Native culture. It passed the House of Representatives. The name of the law was peyote, and you need to understand why peyote. They named it. Peyote is perhaps the most stable, most powerful medicine, we call it medicine, known to the human condition. You cannot overdose on it, and you cannot, it's not addictive. Pure and simple. There's nothing negative about it at all. Its major responsibilities from my experience is it teaches you to know the truth. That's what it does. You cannot lie on that medicine. It sounds weird, but it's true. It's like a truth medicine or a truth serum is what it is. Well, because of the safety of that particular medicine and the powerfulness of it, throughout history, before recorded history, it was the major commerce on the trading routes going from Peru all the way up to Alaska. It was the number one thing because all the ceremonies utilized peyote because of its significance. So the reason they named it the peyote law was to outlaw the entire Native culture because the culture sustains itself through its ceremonies. So they figured they outlaw the peyote and then name all the other ceremonies that they could and try to outlaw it. And as I said, it passed the House of Representatives. And that's when my grandfather came in. Well, when they people came, when he brought his statements to the Indians in Oklahoma, that if you do not do what I'm going to tell you to do, your culture will be destroyed. And what he did is he convinced them to make their culture, the American Native culture, and incorporate it as the Native American Church in 1918. He actually wrote the bylaws for that first church. He was so maligned by the influences of the Bureau of Indian Affairs that the Smithsonian Institute was ordered to ground him, and he no longer could do his studies. And he died as a broken man because he could not study the Native American culture as it was. So I'm going to move forward here. I'm going to move forward. You see a picture up here, okay? That's one of the most precious human beings I ever met in my life. Her name is Guadalupe. And she's a Huicholi Maracami, or was a Huicholi Maracami. And before that, before I really go into her story, I want to give you a little background about the Native American Church and how it was developed prior to 1918. How many people ever heard of a fellow by the name of Quannon Parker? Anybody know that name? You know, that's fantastic. He was a Comanche chief. To let you know a little bit about him, he was unequivocally one of the most violent, ruthless American Native warrior that our history ever found. You did not want to be captured by him if you're a Mexican or an American. He was just brutal. And when I say, I'll give you an example. If you were captured by him, he would string you up to a post, put a bunch of kindling around you, light a fire, and as you're burning up and stuff, he would take his knife and carve a piece of flesh off of you and cook it, and then eat it in front of you as you're dying. This is how bad this guy was. Well, he became extremely ill. And his mother, who happened to be Parker, was a white lady, but she was captured and ended up being saved, you might say, by the American Army. And then she escaped from the American Army and went to go back to live with the Comanches. It's kind of interesting. But nevertheless, Quannon was extremely ill. And his mother tried to get some doctors. He wouldn't take any doctors, any white man doctors. And she couldn't, he said, I want a medicine person. Well, he couldn't find a medicine man. She found a Maracami, a Mexican Maracami, Huicholi Indian, very similar to Guadalupe. And she brought this, his mother brought this Maracami to Quannon Parker. She immediately took him out of the house in which he was stored and made a kind of a lean-to so the four winds would get to him. And a lot of people have asked, what is, I mean, people will say that the Native American Church's temple is the earth. And but it's more than that. The temple of the Native American Church, its ceiling is God the Father. And the floor is God the Mother. And they don't want any walls. But that is the temple. Everything is sacred that's on Mother Earth. It's just the way it is. So she put him out into nature where the winds could come, and started putting peyote into this man. Well, I mean, I don't know how long, but I've had to do that for some people for 30 days before they could break through their guilt. Anyway, after a period of time, Quantum Parker realized the reason he is so ill is because of the horrible things he had been doing. Remember I said to you, you can't lie on peyote? So he made a commitment that if he were to survive, he would be a tremendous example of peace. He ended up becoming a tremendous leader of his tribe. He was well known as being one of the largest cattle ranchers around. He sat with Teddy Roosevelt. They considered each other wonderful friends. That was a Murakami, a woman, filling this ruthless man with peyote, and he turned into be a loving, kind human being. Well, some time ago, it was about it was about 1989. Guadalupe came up to my home in Utah from Mexico, from things, and she blessed me to take her culture to the American people. This woman. Now that sounds kind of weird. I know that, because it sounded weird to me, to be frank with you. Preceding to her coming to my home, which was in Utah, I received a telephone call. And the telephone call went like this. He says, James, I'm here in Canada, Montreal. Well, that's good, Edmund. And he says, I brought Guadalupe from the Sierra Madre mountain range to help out and hopefully give some peace to a war of sorts going on between the Canadian Army and this Indian tribe. And I said, whoa. And it seemed to me I heard something about that. It was about a bridge. And the Indians were on one side of the bridge, and the Canadian Army was on the other side of the bridge, and they were shooting and killing each other. And I don't know what it was about. To this day, I still don't know what it's about. But nevertheless, that's the reason. Well, Guadalupe, with that hat that she has on, big smile. Do you notice the smile on her? I mean, I call it the permagrin, because she just always had it. You could not be in her presence and just not feel this love that emanated from her. Well, this little lady, that little lady's about 5'4" and 5'4", but just a bubble of love. She had this little bamboo stool that she always used in the ceremonies, and when she was talking to characters like me, she'd sit on that with her little hat and the smile and her drum, walked in the middle of this battle, sat down in the middle of this bridge and started drumming, and that war was over. To this day, I don't understand it. I had another elder say, when I was so angry at certain things going on and stuff, and she put her hand on my heart and said, James, love, patience, and forgiveness will cure all injustices over time. God, I love these elder women. I'm proud and honored to say the Native American Church, Oklahoma Native American Church, is a matriarchal church. Women are honored. And our greatest medicine people, in all reality, are the women. Guys, let me ask you. When one of our children happen to skin their knees, do they go running to us? it's always the mothers. Now, there might be some exceptions, okay, but as a whole, the women are the healers. They really are the healers. Leslie Fulbo. Yeah. Sometime in 1997, I formulated Oklahoma Native American Church. And the reason I did that is I belonged to another organization called Native American Church of North America. That church of North American, I used to buy their peyote, and because people knew who I was related to Osceola, and I was related to James Mooney. And so I almost had carte blanche buying peyote in Texas, which is the only place that you can acquire it. Well, when I started learning about this from Clifford Jake, as a matter of fact, the uncle of Pipe Springs Paiutes in Arizona, his uncle, who was the person that actually saved me from bipolar manic depressive with peyote, he made a statement. I went to him, I said, gosh, Clifford, you've got to take this medicine to the white man. I mean, bipolar manic depression it's killing this entire culture. He looked at me and said, no, I hate those white people. They deserve to wallow in their pain. And I said, how can you do that? And he says, you know, I do work with people. But if I worked with white people and made it known, my Indian brothers would kill me, James. And so I'm going to train you to take it to the white man. And he did that for 10 years. And then finally gifted me, a few weeks before he passed over, his cedar bag. And that may not mean very much to most of you, but that means I'm transferring you the authority to represent my medicine. So I have two people now. The Huicholes of Mexico, and now a Bannock Paiute medicine man. Well, when he said, if you do take this medicine to the white man, I'm going to tell you, two things are going to happen, James. And he says, the white man's going to throw you in his prisons, and the Indian's going to try to kill you. I kind of laughed at him. I said, well, I'm not going to do that. And he basically always says, you know, sometimes you got to remember something, James. Yeah, you're a half-breed. Yeah, that's true. But there's something you got to remember, James. Just the slightest amount, just the teeniest amount of Indian blood is enough to corrupt your whole system. I said, okay. As time went on, and the North American Native American Church president wrote me a letter saying that you're working with white people, James, and we demand you to have every one of those white people that you've been working with arrested for intruding upon our Native American ceremonies. I said, what? People coming to me for help, and I'm supposed to have them thrown in prison? Give me a break. So I called Salvador Johnson, who I was buying peyote from down in Texas, and I told him the circumstances. I said, Clifford, I can't do this. And I said, would you, if I were to open up a Native American church, would you sell and distribute peyote to me? And he said, James, I would sell to you before I would the North American Native American Church. So he turned me on to the Texas public safety person in charge of the distribution and harvesting of peyote, and which is part of the DEA. And she got me to develop Oklahoma Native American Church in 1997. So everything went on really well. I went ahead and started doing ceremonies. At one time, I was doing no less than 3 ceremonies a day, 4 days a week, and then another ceremony, a sweat lodge ceremony, on Fridays. And then I'd do a peyote ceremony on Sunday. All of a sudden, the prophecy of Clifford Jake came true. I had so many threats by the Indians to kill me, it was unbelievable. The final threat happened to be a threat to kill my entire family, including my kids. I called Clifford and I said, Clifford, this is what's going to happen. And he says, James, you have got to go and get a blessing from that man. And I said, you better believe it. I got in my car and with another friend of mine and drove up there immediately. And I went to the Rosebud Reservation, and sure enough, he wasn't there. He was in a hospital in Rapid City. So I immediately drove over to the Rapid City, and I see him in his bed with his family around him. He looked up at me, never knew who he was, or never seen anything. He looked at me, and I could see all his family members was surrounding him. And he said, oh, you need my help. Yeah, I do. I walked over there. He said, come here. I walked over there, and I had a bunch of peyote, about a couple hundred peyote buttons. He took that peyote button, and he put it to his heart and started sobbing with gratitude. And peyote is the most precious thing in his life. And he said, well, we better get at it. We better give you a blessing. He knew what I needed. I had no idea. Never met him before. Never met me. And he said this blessing in his language, Lakota Sioux. And he said, you didn't understand a word I said, did you, James? I said, no. And he says, well, he pulled me gently towards his bed. He was setting up. He looked into my eyes, holding on this peyote. And he says, you take this medicine to the white man, James. The very people that slaughtered his ancestors. He wants me to take this most precious thing to the very people that murdered his family. Forgiveness, good people. Forgiveness. Thank you very much.